So what should today's organizations do? What are the important issues that need to address? In order to understand that, a group of over 50 students, MBA students who have considerable work experience were asked to fill in a survey and asked to articulate what in their opinion today's organizations must address as some of the pressing issues. There are more than 150 responses, and if you look at these responses, there are two major categories in which they fall, and some of the balance I would call it as others because they were a variety of miscellaneous things. The first category of responses pertain to leadership, culture, ethical and social values. Essentially, the responses were talking about why organizations must address seriously on building a good leadership in the organization, how it is important to address build a foundation for ethical and moral values, how to build, it's important to build a good culture, even address issues like sustainability and so on. So these are all part of one set of issues which I might call it as leadership, culture and values. And this slide has some of those important responses frequently observed. The second set of issues are all related to what I may call it as workplace. There were several responses which talked about providing a good career planning, having fair compensation, making sure that compensation is fair, treating employees as human beings rather than mere headcounts and resources and so on. And in other words, there are many of them, and they were all talking about the need to create meaningful workplaces. It was articulated in many ways. So in other words, how do we create more meaningful workplace? That's the second category of responses. Some of these important things are listed here. The third, or I would call it as miscellaneous or others, because there are many things. How should organizations ensure that their focus is right? How do they bring focus among the teams? How do they make sure that hierarchies don't come in the way? How do they make sure that the middle management works? So there are many issues of this kind. So some of those frequent responses are here. Now if you look at these responses, there are a couple of interesting observations. First of all, every individual spends considerable amount of time in working. Today we seem to work even up to the age of 65, 70 and even 75 we seem to work, and on a daily basis we seem to work more than 12 hours or even 12 hours. So a considerable, more than half of our life is spent in a place pertaining to work, yet we seem to have a lot of concerns about work-related issues, and we think that the organizations have to address them. The real question is, should organizations address, or should individuals address? Do both of us have a role to play, and if so, what are all the roles that we need to play to really address this issue? I think this is a very interesting fallout of these responses and this survey. The second thing which also comes out clearly is, despite several years of talking about leadership, more leadership theories, more and more thinking, I think a lot more work needs to be done. The leadership pipeline is still not there. I think we need to understand even more clearly what true leadership means, and we also need to know how to practice it. I think this is the second issue that seems to come out of it. So it may not be out of place to say that we are in a certain paradigm, we look at these kinds of issues. While we continue to ride this horse, it may be worthwhile to look around and say, are there different perspectives, newer paradigms elsewhere, which we may be able to inherit? Because from time immemorial, we must be doing it. There are people, so they need to come together, they need to communicate, they need to be led and so on. So are there alternative paradigms which we can look at? That may be another interesting thing that we need to look at. given the kind of responses. I think to an extent, the research also currently talks about some of these requirements and possibilities that we need to set our eye on.